Hi guys, this is Pratika Masani and today I'm going to talk about exploring semantic model relationships by using SemPy. I've recently blogged about semantic link and semantic labs. In that blog post, I talked about how you could document your workspace by using semantic links and semantic labs modules. But in this post, I'm going to focus only on the one functionality of this module called it's not only one. Actually, we're going to use a few functionalities, but basically it gives us a view to explore the relationships of the semantic model. So exploring semantic model relationships is quite important. So there are two scenarios where it's very useful. One is when you're creating your own your self-service PI, and the other one is when you're using semantic model within a notebooks. So when you're creating self-service PI, it is good to understand how your model is created, how your relationships are there, so that you could use the right columns and right measures when you're creating your visuals. The same goes to like in notebooks as well. So if you're utilizing semantic model items or attributes in your notebook, then it is good to understand how the relationships are created so that you could make sure that you're using the right columns and the right measures in your code in your notebook. And this use case, the one I'm working on, is I got inspired by it at DataMinds last year. When I saw the semantic link can show the relationships, I got very excited and I was like, oh wow, this is really cool. How could I display these images in Power BI? That's kind of what inspired this session. But not this session, this video or this blog post. But however, this may not be like, not everyone really want to view these relationships in Power BI. So that's why it's a cool use case, but may not be really useful use case. I think when this could be useful is like how we could produce many graph objects in notebook, and sometimes you actually want to save them in your lakehouse so that you could view in your Power BI. So if you're looking at it from that perspective, this is a pretty good, useful use case. So let's see how I'm going to work with it. So there is a nice docs available out there explaining how to use semantic link, and also especially in this case, how to explore and validate relationships of your semantic models. So basically, you install it, you use a few functions that's available within that. So let me show you that in a notebook. So this is the notebook I have pre-created. What I'm doing is first I am setting up the environment. I'm installing the right modules, and I'm also importing the other modules that I need for this notebook. It no longer needs semantic link. I created this notebook a while back, but now when you create a notebook in Fabric, it automatically installs the semantic link. So you probably doesn't need that anymore, but rest of them kind of need it. Yeah, at least these bottom ones. And this next thing, what I'm doing is I am, for this current workspace, I am getting the list of all the data sets that's available in this workspace. So if I display that workspace in the next code cell, as you could see, these are the various data sets that's available in this workspace. So instead of working with all the data sets, I want to work with one data set. So what I'm doing here, I'm giving the data set name as a variable. First, I'm going to get the relationship. So let me comment this and uncomment line 3. So if I execute this, you could see I'm looking at relays plan dataset or semantic model, and then I could see there is one relationship available in this semantic model. It's a very small semantic model. So I'm getting that by using this line. It's like it's listing the relationships that's available for that data set. The next thing what I wanted to do is I want to plot that one. So in this case, I'm going to plot the relationship. First, let me see what would be the output. Instead of printing the output, let me just display it. So when I plot that relationship and display it, as you could see, it gives me a nice graphical representation of the relationships in the table. So if I actually, instead of displaying it, if I print the value of that variable, you could see what it's doing is it's giving me a diagraph. Actually, what I need is a square. So it's giving me a diagraph, and which is what we are using to displaying. So the idea here is I want to convert this diagraph into a string, and well, it is like, in this case it is a string, but I want to convert this into SVG or like a base 64, then save that into Lakehouse and then show it as an image URL in Power BI, because in Power BI we could show image URL. So it's more about, I have string, convert that into SVG, and then show that in a Power BI. That's like those are the 3 steps that I wanted to do. That's the idea behind it. So the next step is to convert this into SVG. So for that, let me grab some code from here, and let's carry on working with one data set for this simplicity. So next thing what I'm going to do is first is convert this into a SVG. So this is the code, line number 9 is where it's converting that into SVG. So if I comment the rest of the code and actually just display SVG text, then you could see how the output would look like. So when I convert this fig into SVG, what it's giving me a big XML file where I have SVG in it. So as you could see, there is a SVG endpoint there, and there must be a SVG starting point, probably this one there in here. So in Power BI, what I need is I need a proper SVG file. So for that reason, what I'm going to do is I'm going to, instead of getting all the content, what I'm interested in is to get only the SVG content. So if I display this now, actually, let me uncomment this. So if I run this cell, now as you could see, I have a very nice SVG text only. So it's giving me SVG from the beginning and to the end for this data set. So this is basically what I'm going to do is like I'm going to iterate through all the data sets I have here and get me a SVG string for each of those data sets. So in this code, what's happening here is I'm running a loop. So I have a for loop to go through each of the data set, and then I have a bit of text here, which is basically like literally the same thing that we were doing is like it's converting to the SVG, and it's getting me only the SVG content. At the end, I'm appending that, putting that into a list where I have a data set and I also have SVG content, and finally I'm keeping that into a SVG text. I'm also doing a few important things. First one is I'm making sure the relationships are not empty. So like especially in Fabric, whenever we create a lakehouse, it automatically creates a default semantic model. And if I'm not using default semantic model, then it won't have any relationships. So I don't want to have the relationship diagrams for those ones. So I'm omitting every semantic model where there are no relationships. And the next thing which is important is to create this image URL. So for Power BI to accept a string as an image URL, it should have a right format. So in this case, I'm using SVG text, so I'm appending the text here, which would convert this string into a SVG image. But if you have like a base 64, this string would be a tiny bit different. There is an example later in this notebook where I'm actually working with base 64. So basically what I'm doing is I am getting the string, I'm converting, appending the text so that it works as SVG image URL, and then I'm dropping the columns that I don't need. So that's basically what's going on here. And at the end, I'm putting everything in a data frame. So if I look at the that data frame, as you could see, what I have here is I have a data set name, and I also have a image URL as a column, which has my SVG. And you could see, like, I don't have all the data set. I have only 9 data sets where there are relationships. The next thing which is important is the data limitations. So Power BI has like a 30,000 characters limit when it comes to for a column. So SVGs are usually okay. They are much smaller, but if much smaller compared to base 64. So initially I started working with base 64, then I changed this notebook to work with SVG. But and again, another important thing is the models I'm working here are small models, but if you're working with very large models, or if you're working with large images, then the string would be very long. So in that case, we need to be able to handle that, like, that how many characters we could have in a column in Power BI. So I followed Chris Webb's blog post here. And Chris Webbs talks about how you could handle that one in Power Query. So I used the same concept. And what I did here is, but the same thing in Python. So what I'm doing here, first I'm finding the maximum length of the string. And then I made a chunk size, which is a 30,000. And then I'm calculating number of columns that I need to split into based on my maximum length and the chunk size. And then basically what I have here is there is a loop which is creating those columns and then splitting that my image URL into those many columns. And finally, I'm basically keeping all that data into a lakehouse. So if I go to my Power BI model, so let me go and open the model. So this is my model. It's extremely simple model, and as you could see, based upon how long my string is, this was created based on base 64 anyway. So what I have here is I have 5 columns based on that. So what I'm going to do here is I'm actually going to create a measure. It's a very simple measure. It's basically concatenating all the data that's there in the it's basically concatenating all the columns. I should format it nicely so that it's easy to read. But as you could see, it's basically concatenating. And the other thing that's happening here is I am going to advanced, and I'm also marking this image URL data category as a image URL. So now when I go to my Power BI, I could use, so in this case, I'm just using my dataset name and image, and you could see like all the relationship diagrams. This is like a simple table visual, and I have a column and image as another column. But you could also use some nice custom visuals to be able to view them. So in this case, like if I go to release plan, this is a simple one, so it's showing me that. But if I go to a much complex one, it still nicely displays the image URL, my image as an image in my Power BI report. So I think it's pretty nice use case if you are planning to show your graphics in Power BI, or like you could create some really cool use cases which may not have a valid reasons. But anyway, so that's it. Thank you for watching. Let me know what you think about the video or the use case in the comments. Bye.